All right, Dustin, the recording started, so go ahead and introduce yourself and rock and roll.
All right, great. Thank you, Steve. My name is Dustin Ryan. I'm a data and AI specialist at Microsoft, and I'm on our education team, and I'm aligned with our Southeast customers. So I get to help our universities and departments of education and school districts across the Southeast do interesting things with data. Steve, are you able to see my screen and my my slides and my camera okay?
Yes, sir.
Okay, all right, great. So to start this session off, you've probably noticed that there's a QR code up on the screen. If you don't see the QR code for some reason, probably hop out of the meeting and try and join back in, and hopefully you can see it. There's a short little 5-question survey. The results of the survey and the information collected in the survey, it's all anonymous, so there's no information collected, but it's just 5 short questions about how your organization is using data. And I thought we would do this just to kind of spark some discussion here at the beginning. The title of the session is Driving Positive Outcomes with Data. And as Steve indicated in the chat, the link to the survey is also in the chat window. So feel free to grab that, or you can just type it into your phone or your browser and do the survey there. But I hope that this session will be more of a discussion and less of a presentation. I do presentations all day long, every day of my life. So whenever we have discussions, it's always more interesting for me. So hopefully this will be a discussion as opposed to just a show up and throw up kind of a presentation, although I do have a few slides to kind of help guide the conversation. So take a look at the survey, just fill out a few results. Now the neat thing about this survey is I created it in Microsoft Forms, and here let me share my screen a little bit differently here. All right, created it in Microsoft Forms, and I've got a Power Automate flow that is hooked up to the back end of this. And as you fill out the results, we should see this Power BI dashboard be populated with the results. So hopefully you're filling out the results. Here they go. They're starting to come in now. As you guys are filling out the results in that form, the Power Automate is pushing those results into a real-time data set that lives in Power BI. So I'm kind of collecting these on the fly. There's no personal information here, but I just kind of get to see the anonymized results here. So I'll give you a couple of more minutes. And really like I said earlier, the name of this session is called Driving Positive Outcomes with Data. And what I want to accomplish with this session is to kind of encapsulate some of the common challenges that we see many organizations facing with gaining value with their data, and how do we see organizations addressing those challenges, and how do we at Microsoft here help organizations address those specific challenges. I'll give you just a couple more minutes here, and then I'm going to save some time for question and answers at the end of the session. But of course, if you have questions, don't hesitate to just, you can type them in the chat window if you'd like to do that, or you can even come off mute and ask the questions verbally in the meeting. I don't mind that at all. So that'll be good.
While we're waiting, Dustin, can I ask you a question just a little bit about that setup you said that you did?
Yeah, absolutely.
So what I thought I heard you say is that you gave us the form. We're filling out the form. You have a Power Automate flow that's pushing that into a SharePoint list. Is that right?
So it actually goes into a real-time data set in Power BI.
Ah, so it skips SharePoint completely.
So
very nice.
Power Automate flow, Power BI.
Nice.
So it pushes it in real time. The cool thing is in the Power BI dashboard that as soon as those records hit that real-time data set, it just automatically popping up here in the results.
Right. Very sweet.
Yeah, very cool. And it's super easy to do too. You could probably do something similar in, just about 10 minutes worth of work. You'd spend more time trying to come up with what the question should be in the form than actually.
Very cool.
Yeah, good question. At the end of the session, I'll be posting the slides and everything. I've got some helpful links and resources that are at the end of the slides that are going to tie into everything that we said. So I'll share a copy of the slides here, and then you'll have that as a resource. But let's jump in here. All right, so the first question was my current, or really more of a statement, but a question for you to respond to. My current analytics and business intelligence solution eases reporting across systems and data sources. And we got just one response for completely agree, 4 responses for somewhat agree, and then 1 neutral and 3 somewhat disagree, and no completely disagree. So that's a good thing. I'll be honest, most of the customers that I'm working with in education, I probably wouldn't say that there are any that would just like wholeheartedly say, oh, I completely agree that reporting across disconnected systems is easy. And I think part of the reason for that is just that the data landscape in really in any industry, but in education especially, is just changing so quickly. And getting a firm handle on the data that's available to you and being able to effectively utilize that is just something that I don't think you ever really nail it down and get it fixed. It's something that some organizations do better than others, and there's some organizations that don't do it well at all. But it's something that we all, of course, are striving to get better at, right? Because we all recognize that being able to more effectively leverage data can lead to positive outcomes with whatever organization you're in. So that's good that nobody wrote this completely disagree. The second question in the survey here is, the end users have a high level of trust and confidence in the data. So 1 completely agree, 3 somewhat agree, 2 neutrals, 2 somewhat disagree, and 1 completely disagree. Trust in the data is a really big deal. And if you're a data professional, I started my career as a data professional before I started working for Microsoft, and now I'm more on like the architecture and kind of sales side. Before I was a consultant and was building data warehouses and ETL solutions and reporting analysts, all these kinds of things. When you're in a scenario where you have users that don't trust the data, that's a really bad place to be in. Because if you're the person building solutions and nobody trusts the data, right, those are solutions that are not being utilized because nobody really trusts the data. So if you're in a scenario where you have users that do not trust the data, they don't feel like they can get the answers out of the data sets that are being provided that they need, that's not a good scenario to be in, because you end up with conflict and a slowness of innovation, because nobody really knows if the data they're working with is the actual real data, is trustworthy, and can be used to make important business decisions. Third question here is, my report development team is able to respond to new reporting and analytics requirements in a timely fashion. This honestly is not surprising, right? So nobody agreed. Nobody completely agreed, and nobody somewhat agreed. And based on just what I've seen kind of anecdotally, this is what I probably would answer to, is that the organizations that I'm working with, right, to get a request fulfilled for a new report, a new data set, a new KPI, a new business metric, whatever that might be, it usually takes a lot of time. And since everyone either responded they were neutral here, or they somewhat disagree or completely disagree, would anyone kind of care to chime in on what you're seeing as far as turnaround times to get requests fulfilled, that have to do with new reports, or why does it take so long? Anybody care to share kind of any insights for what you're seeing in your organization?
I'll go ahead and share a little bit. I don't work anymore with reports, reporting, of the different systems of record data, but I've stayed from the outside engaged in it, and we just switched over from some purchased heavily customized systems over to Workday, university setting, and so we are just starting to think about data governance, with business people actually providing the data governance and treating it holistically. Historically, though, I came to this university, I guess, about 14 years ago, with the idea of going in, working in that area of reporting off the systems of record. And we didn't even have people doing dashboards. We were using Cognos, but we were providing the reports. So people weren't at the stage they could do the analysis. I think the data was too complex, as far as the way to lay it out. So I think we're starting at it a much better way. We just went live with Workday a few months ago, and I think it's going to be a much better story. But it's still hard. There's so much data that is not specific to a system of record that people have processed. It's where does the whole where does Microsoft play so well at? It's like this. Obviously, with Dynamics, they play in the system of record, but or in the ERP. But for the rest of it, there's so much data out there. People want to try to get their hands on and utilize.
Mm-hmm.
And so
Yeah,
that's
point.
The other area that I think that people can get a lot of value out of. Sorry, I'm done.
Yeah, that's true. And just the level of expertise and level of comfort for users is just so wide. You've got some users that are really comfortable with doing things on their own, and you've got some users that they just want to get an email with like a chart in it.
Yeah.
And that's where they're comfortable at, right? And the challenge for us is if you're a data professional and working in that realm, right, is how do you enable users of all types, all levels of skill set, all levels of domain knowledge to be successful with data? It's a real challenge. The fourth question here was end users are able to quickly find the data they need in order to be successful. And so no completely agrees, no somewhat agrees. It's all neutrals and disagree or completely disagree. And I definitely think there's a relationship there with a third question, right? To whether you can find the data that you need and can the reporting team respond to requests. So if you can't find the data that you need, right, then you've got to go to the experts. If that's somebody in IT or somebody else in your organization that works with this data all the time, then you got to wait on them to fulfill that, right? So there's definitely some sort of a correlation there between number 3 and number 4. Number 5 says, my reporting and analytics platform is a unified platform that eases data cleansing, governance, reporting, and analytics. And got a lot of completely disagrees there. No completely agrees or no somewhat disagrees. And honestly, just kind of speaking anecdotally, this is typical. I don't work with a ton of institutions that are like, oh yeah, we have a great unified platform. Cleaning data is simplified. Governance, we have a holistic governance strategy over our data. Reporting and analytics is easier. And so, that's something that I see. So, I don't think that anybody here is probably in a unique situation that's responded to this. It's just a kind of a typical thing that I've noticed across the organizations that I'm working with. All right, so let's go pull back up the slides here. Okay, cool.
Yeah, I think if it's okay if I share just a little bit anecdotally, I think from
absolutely.
our institution, and I'm not sure if others are like this, from our technical standpoint or infrastructure standpoint, we are aware of our Power BI group at our institution, as it's called, our analytics group, but we're not allowed to leverage them because mostly we were always told that they are swamped with doing things for faculty, and and we're not sure what that is. So it turns into, well, they know where all the data is. We don't know where all the data is, even though we generate all the data. But it turns into this problem of, well, wait, how do we get access to the same level of data views that they see, but we're not allowed to because they're the data people, right? So it's just this weird kind of amalgamous relationship that our institution has with our own analytics team.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. Let me fix that there. My slide here is wanting to auto advance. And that's an interesting scenario too. And I will say that the organizations that do this really well are the ones that have a really firm handle on adoption and governance, right? And enabling users to be successful with data is a huge part of that, of your adoption strategy, right? So that people know where to find the right data, know where to access the data, know how to, which are the gospel data sets that we can trust, that I can work with, that I know that if I'm going to play in there, the guardrails are in place that I ensure that I can be successful with those things, or with those assets. The organizations that do a really good job are the ones that have a good handle on the two things I talked about, adoption and governance. All right. Let me see if this will. I don't know why it's auto advancing there because I don't have any animations on that, but we'll just do this the hard way then. All right. Sorry about that. Almost there. Okay. Cool. So those questions that we just talked about kind of align to this slide, and I'm sure many of you have seen this analytics maturity model. And when we talk about data, right, if you're a data professional or you work with data, you probably understand that data is a key and strategic asset. Not just to talk about, things like business or healthcare, retail, of course, education, that's why we're here. And everything that's happening in the world around us is producing this incredibly rich data sets that can help us do things like create new experiences, new efficiencies, new models, new inventions. And being able to effectively leverage that data can be the differentiator for your students in the classrooms and your colleges and all the folks that you support within the university. But while data is pervasive, I work with incredibly large, well-funded institutions to very small institutions, even itty-bitty tiny school districts that have one high school and one middle school and one elementary school. Everybody's got a lot of data. Data is incredibly pervasive. But the tricky part is, how do we derive actionable intelligence from that data? That's the really elusive part. And the organizations that we're working with need to transform that data into some sort of intelligent action in order to reinvent or overhaul or improve educational processes. And typically, this is not a very easy thing to do when you think about improving educational processes to make them data-driven. But in order to derive actionable intelligence from data, we need to be able to effectively and quickly analyze data so that we can move from kind of this left side of the screen where you've got descriptive analytics and you have a firm understanding of maybe what has happened. You can look back in time and understand, well, how many students re-enrolled, how many didn't re-enroll, who's succeeding, who's not succeeding, right? And then move kind of up this curve to understand, well, why did something happen? Maybe why did somebody re-enroll, or why did somebody unenroll? Did their funding did their financial aid not come in, or whatever the reason might be. And the kind of the holy grail, right, is to go from this descriptive and this decision-based analytics to predictive analytics, and then even a prescriptive analytics. So if I can predict what's going to happen, right, if I can use things like machine learning and artificial intelligence to predict maybe why somebody is not going to re-enroll or why a student is going to churn out of the university, if I can predict that, well, then what can I do to change that outcome? Can I prescribe some sort of action to ensure that that student is successful or they don't churn from the university? And so the type of analytics that an organization is capable of executing are really indicative of where they're at in this kind of maturity model. And you can probably look at this curve and have a general idea of maybe where your institution is potentially at. I'll just say, speaking anecdotally again, most of the organizations that I'm working with are definitely to the left side of this curve, right? Most folks have a handle on some sort of descriptive analysis. There are some that don't, but most do have a handle on being able to answer the what happened question. And then many are also answering the why did it happen question, that decision-based analytics. And we're seeing more and more approach Microsoft and say, well, can you help us predict what will happen? Can I predict whether somebody's going to finish their program of study on time? Are they going to graduate on time? Are they going to churn out of the university? Are they going to re-enroll or not re-enroll? And how do we engage with those things? More and more of those conversations are happening, but I would say probably very few institutions are dabbling in this, the number 3 and the number 4 kind of side of the curve here. I want to share some interesting statistics here with you. And these are some statistics that came out of a study that was done by Harvard Business Review a couple of years ago in 2019. Analytics and AI is the #1 investment for business leaders. However, they struggle to maximize ROI. 80% report struggling to become mature users of data, and 55% report data silos and data management difficulties as roadblocks. So if you probably read those numbers, you'd probably be like, well, that's not, totally surprising. I might expect that just based on what I've seen anecdotally in my organization. The interesting part about this survey, though, is that this was conducted with organizations that are users of modern cloud platforms. So these aren't like organizations that are running on legacy software and systems, legacy kind of solutions. These are people that, they run in Azure, they run in AWS, they run in GCP, they're running in IBM or Oracle Cloud, right? So they're using, supposedly cutting edge technology and the best of the best, but they're still struggling to become mature users of data. And so what that tells us is it's just not, obviously this is just not a technology problem, right? We can't just throw cutting edge technology at the solution and then fix it, right? There's more to it than just using the best and the newest technology out there. The daunting reality of the data landscape, it's really hard to overstate it. And this is something that I've just kind of personally noticed, especially in the past couple of years, and you guys probably have noticed as well. There really is this exponential expansion of devices, data sources, data types, and sheer volume that comes from disparate internal and external data sources. And if we've seen anything, if anything that has happened, in the past year with the pandemic and COVID, the data landscape is definitely becoming more and more complex. So the data silos are increasing. They're definitely not decreasing. And that's a very expensive and difficult problem to contend with. And then in addition to that, when you think about the complexity of the data landscape, right, you've got compliance, you've got security, you've got privacy. Those are all things that have to be considered, right? And so we know that, right? But unfortunately, there is a tangible negative impact if we don't do anything, right? So if we just say, you know what, we don't have time to do anything because we're just struggling to keep the lights on, which unfortunately that is most institutions that I'm kind of seeing is people are just struggling to keep the lights on. The negative impact to not really doing anything to improve this problem is that you're not going to realize the potential for differentiated experiences. And that's a big deal, especially when you consider that the world that your students live in, right? They live in the world of Netflix and Amazon Prime and Disney Fast Pass and, well, whatever they call it now. Disney changed it. That's the world that they live in, right? And oftentimes that's incredibly different than the world that they live in when they're at school, when they're in class and they're doing those things. Another negative impact of that is, users are making decisions based on inaccurate or incomplete information. And I think that is a huge problem, right? And we talked about that with the question about, well, do users actually trust the data in your organization? If they don't trust the data, there's definitely a potential for a slowing of innovation. And there's a lot of data and AI providers that play in kind of this space of solving these challenges too. But I think Microsoft is in a really unique position as one of the only solution providers that can meet this challenge kind of on all fronts. So I've kind of broken it down here into 5 kind of individual challenges. And I'll be honest with you guys, there's really nothing truly groundbreaking about these kind of 5 top challenges for being successful with data. But I think it's helpful to kind of help guide the conversation, right? Most everybody is struggling with disconnected data sources, right? You got the ERP, or if you've got if you're a hospital system attached to the university, right? Maybe you got an EHR or EMR, medical record or health record systems. You might have the student information systems. You've got finance systems, right? You've got all those different systems, right? And typically those things do not talk and play well together. And in that scenario where data is disconnected, right, this leads to really a lack of a single source of truth, right? Well, how do I get just a single source of truth for maybe a given question that I want to answer? And in a world of disconnected data sources, the data sets, right? The other challenge here, right, is the data sets are varying and changing, right? So data is changing all the time. How do I keep it up to date if I want to bring that data together? How do I ensure that I can get a kind of a complete longitudinal analysis for an enterprise-wide like reporting platform. And that's tough because typically those systems of record don't keep history for all of time. So if I want to be able to go back and do trending and longitudinal analysis over 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, whatever that looks like, that's going to be really difficult in a scenario where the data sources are disconnected. And then having a single view of history, a single source of truth, just when you're in the scenario with the disconnected systems and it's changing rapidly and you have no way to bring that together, you don't have a single source of truth. You have no complete view of history. And in that scenario, a user who has questions about data that they need to be able to answer in order to respond to changes in the business, changes in the organization, and make effective business decisions, right? That user is not going to be able to do that on their own. So they have just this inability to do self-service on their own. Those last two items there on the right, self-service is not possible, and because of that, every reporting request has to go back to the reporting team, and they're just swamped. They've got reporting requests out the wazoo, and for them to get back to a user who has a question, it's just going to take them weeks and weeks, potentially months and months, just to respond to those reporting requests. So what is the solution to these challenges? And it really boils down to kind of the inverse of the things that we just talked about, right? We need an environment where these data sets can be integrated. So the data really needs to be integrated and centralized using modern storage technologies that are flexible and scalable, right? So I need a place where I can bring all of this data and store it in a format that is also optimized for analytics. When you think about the source systems that we just talked about, those systems are not typically optimized for advanced analytics, right? They're not in formats where I can mash it up with other data sets very easily. I can query it. I can get rapid results back. Those source systems are not typically optimized for those things. But I need a system where I can store all of that data in a single integrated place. That place needs to be flexible. It needs to be scalable, and it needs to be optimized for analytics. So I need to be able to get millions and millions of records in there. I need to get potentially billions of records into that system as quickly as possible, but then also be able to get it out as quickly as possible. And I don't want to have to wait, because if I have to wait, I'm going to forget why I even asked the question to begin with. The third item here, right, is if I can integrate this data together in a way that's optimized for analytics, then I can start to do things like create a trusted repository, that single source of truth where the data is clean, it's trusted by the users, and it's validated. And now I can start to ease access to the data. When I have a place where all that data lives and it's clean and trusted and validated, and we know that it's the gospel and that I can hand it to a user and that I've put controls and governance in place to keep users from getting in any trouble with the data, then I can start to ease access to the data. And that's where self-service becomes a reality. I can give users access to the data. I can let them ask questions at their own terms, and not every single reporting request has to go through the reporting team. The reporting team is no longer a blocker for innovation. They can become an enabler for innovation, because now they can focus on the use cases that require their expertise. Yeah, was there a question? Okay, no worries.
Somebody just came off mute.
Yeah, just somebody came off mute. Didn't know if somebody had a cool question. All right, so where I spend most of my time is helping customers try to address these challenges. And at the 6 years that I've been at Microsoft, I've worked with institutions across the United States. And one of the things that we've learned is that most single integrated platforms have 4 kind of basic pillars. When we talk about what a modern analytics ecosystem looks like, there's kind of 4 basic pillars. And if any of you guys subscribe to any of the thinking that Gartner puts out there and other industry experts, you'll hear these kind of 4 pillars of a modern analytics ecosystem that solves these challenges that we just talked about. And this is not like a super techie session, but if you guys have technical questions, we can kind of dive in here a little bit, but I don't want to spend too much time climbing through the weeds here. But when we talk about 4 kind of pillars of a modern analytics ecosystem, I want to really focus here on these 4 blocks, these 4 colored blocks, not the gray blocks. We'll talk about those too, but really the 4 colored blocks, the purple one here, the blue one, the black one, and the orange one. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4. We'll talk about this here. And this is a really interesting slide, because I actually built this. This is a reference architecture that I'm happy to share, and I'll share with you guys in the slide deck here, that we designed in collaboration with other institutions. So Medical University of South Carolina had a lot of feedback on this. Also, University of Pennsylvania had a lot of feedback. Penn State has seen this and had feedback. University of South Florida, University of Miami has seen this. Lots of folks have seen this and kind of given us feedback on it. And so it's been through several iterations. But when we talk about what a modern analytics ecosystem is, we talk about these 4 pillars here. And the first pillar, that number 1 purple block there, is the data lake. Now, when we think about a data lake, right, sometimes we think about just kind of this place where we like throw all the data and it's just a big pile of data there, and then we do analytics on it. And that's not really accurate, right? A data lake is a highly governed and managed environment. So it's not a data swamp. We call it a data lake, right? So the water is clean. That water is our data. It's clean, right? It has a place where it lands. It goes through a processing, and it gets cleaned and prepped for analytics or for the different things that our users might want to do with it, right? So it includes incremental snapshots of change data from the different source systems. It includes unstructured and structured data in its raw format. In a data lake environment, I don't have to define the schema of the data ahead of time. I can ingest it in its raw natural format and then worry about the schema stuff later. So it's mostly schemaless, although there is a shape to it. But that means that because it's mostly schemaless, that it's able to adapt to changes very quickly. So if new columns are showing up in data sets, if columns are being removed from data sets, if we're getting new files all the time and I want to get it in a place where I can do analytics with it, a data lake is a great place to ingest data. Now, the beauty of the data lake, right, is it needs to be incredibly scalable, right? I need to be able to store terabytes, petabytes, potentially exabytes. I don't have any customers that are doing exabytes worth of data in here, but if you had exabytes of data, you could deal with it here with the data lake. And it's a highly distributed environment, right? So that means it's highly scalable. So however much data you have, right, the data lake is a place where we need to be able to handle that. Now, at the end of the day, the data lake really is just a storage location, right? It doesn't have the compute resources that we need to work with that data, but that data lake is the place where I'm just going to store all of this data, and I'm going to bring compute resources to manage it, to load it, to work with it, to clean it, to query it, all of those things, right? To do data science on it and research and all of those things, right? The data lake is just kind of the storage engine for all of that. We'll figure out how to bring compute resources to it later. Now, this is really different from kind of the old world of analytics, right? And if any of you have been, doing analytics and reporting for a long time, you probably remember, those failed data warehouse projects, right? Where somebody said, hey, we need an analytics solution, so we're going to build a data warehouse. And so, you being the good data warehouse developer, or the architect, or the director of that solution, or whatever your role was, right? You said, okay, well, we're going to go talk to the business and we're going to collect all the requirements that we possibly can. And then once I get all the requirements, I'm going to build you a great data warehouse and it's going to do everything that you want. And so you talk to the users and they say, hey, here's the reports that I run every week. Here's the reports I run every month. Here are the things that I need to do quarterly. Here are the things that I need to do every year. And so you collect all those requirements, you build a data warehouse and you give it to them and they're like, oh, that's great. Well, hey, can you show me how to run that one report that Susan builds every week and then she emails out to the team? And then you're like, oh, crap, I didn't talk to Susan. And you say, okay, well, tell me what Susan does. And you realize that you're missing some data. So now you got to go back. You got to go rebuild some ETL. You got to go alter some tables. You got to go alter some reports. And it takes weeks and weeks and weeks. And that's a place that inhibits innovation, right? Because now I've got to go back and I've got to do all of this stuff right here. And the data lake really is to be a place to maybe ask the questions that we haven't ever asked before or haven't been able to ask before, right? When you compare that to like a data warehouse, which we'll talk about here, the number two blue block there, a data warehouse is a place for me to answer the questions that I know I want to ask. The data lake is a place for me to ask the questions that I've never thought to ask about yet or have been unable to ask about. And then once we understand the questions that are relevant, maybe these are new questions that are relevant to the organization. Maybe there's new questions that maybe we've never been able to answer before, or maybe these are questions we've never had to ask before because, you know what, there's never been a pandemic like this before that's shut down the whole country for a year and a half. And so now I've got new questions I want to ask, right? Data lake is a place for me to ingest data in its raw format and then work with it and uncover those questions. But then once we understand the relevant questions, then I can put them in that data warehouse, that place where I have a firm schema, right? It's highly structured. the data here is super clean, right? It's transformed and it's optimized for analytics. And I can start to make this data available more widely to the users that are going to need this data to make important business decisions. So that the data warehouse is that place where we answer kind of the predefined questions. It's less flexible to change for sure, but it's ideal for operational users because the structure is typically easier for them to understand, right? To work with a data warehouse, you can use common BI tools. You can even do things like Excel and Power BI and Tableau and Click and whatever tools you guys have on campus. But you don't have to be a data scientist to use those tools, right? I can just connect in, I can understand the structures, I can write the queries, or the BI tool writes the queries for me, really, and then I can start to work with that data. And so that data lake and that data warehouse together kind of answer those questions about, well, how do I ask questions that I've never been able to ask before? And how do I ask questions and answer those questions that we know are certainly relevant to the organization? And that solves our kind of single source of truth problem, because now we have a single environment where we can give that clean and trusted data to the users and help them be successful with that. But it's not just about enabling self-service or enabling single source of truth on the data. To be able to enable self-service, we also need a place where I can standardize the business metrics, the KPIs, and the security for those users that want to access that data. And that's really where the data virtualization layer comes in. This black box here, this is a place where we take advantage of that single source of truth and we wrap standardization around that single source of truth for things like how do tables and columns relate to one another in relationships and hierarchies? How do we predefine those business metrics? What does security look like? And how do we ensure that users are playing by the security rules across all the data that they're working with? That's where that data virtualization layer comes in. What we don't want is a scenario where I've got this awesome data warehouse where I've built this single source of truth, and then I've got Bobby over here, and he loves Power BI, and so he's going to do Power BI stuff with it. And so he connects the data warehouse and he builds some cool calculations. And then we got Susie over here, and she loves Excel. And so she's doing like pivot tables and pivot charts. And then we got Tom over here, and he's like a Tableau guy. He's been a Tableau guy forever, and you're never going to convince him that Power BI is not the best tool. And Power BI is the best tool. So you've got all these three different tools, and then you show up to a meeting, and Bobby's got, you know, a calculation, and Susie's got a calculation, and Tom's got a calculation. Even though it's all the same data, they've got different calculations, and so people have different numbers. And even though you've got this beautiful single source of truth, the numbers on the reports and charts are different. That's not a good scenario to be in, because now, even though we have a single source of truth of data, they're coming up with different answers and different results. And the data virtualization layer is where we standardize those business metrics. So no matter what tool our users are using, if they prefer Excel, if they prefer Tableau, if they prefer Power BI, or if they prefer whatever, they're using that single source of truth, not just from a data storage perspective, that's important too, but also from a business metrics and KPI perspective. And then the last box, the orange box here, right, is the final pillar of kind of the modern analytics ecosystem. And this is the tools layer. And I kind of, you'll notice it's kind of broken up here into two kind of separate but joined boxes. I break it up here into the data science tools and the data visualization tools, just simply because the users and the tools that are typically working with those tools, they're very different tools, they're very different users. But at the end of the day, this box here is meant to signify the tools and how we enable users of all levels of expertise and domain knowledge to be successful with the data. So if you have folks within your institution, like we talked about earlier, they just need to get a chart in their email that says, hey, here's my KPIs, and that's all I need to know about, then we want to enable those users to get that report, to get that email. And then maybe you have users that are a little more comfortable kind of drilling down and exploring the data. Maybe they've got experience with Excel, and, you know, for better or worse, Excel is the world's #1 BI tool. I'm not saying it's a good thing, but it just kind of is what it is. And so you've got users that are comfortable with things like pivot tables and pivot charts, and we want to enable those users to be successful with the data. And then if you've got data scientists and they're going to get in there and they want to use things like Spark, and they want to write a truckload of Python, and they want to do advanced analytics and machine learning, build predictive models, we also need to enable those users to be successful with the data. But what we certainly don't want to do is say that in order to be successful with our data, you need to have a PhD in data science. That's definitely not the scenario we want to be in, because we want to encourage adoption of the data solutions that we're building. And so in this modern analytics environment, in this final pillar, we have tools that are enabling users of our data with basic BI tools, with subscription-based reporting, maybe even some self-service drill down reporting, everything from that type of user to the data scientist who is very technically skilled and also has a lot of domain knowledge. We need to enable everyone within that kind of skill set to be successful. And that's really what the modern analytics environment is all about. When we talk about a modern analytics ecosystem, we talk about these 4 pillars, right? The data lake, the data warehouse, and the data virtualization, and the tools. And this is where I'm spending a lot of my time helping the institutions that I'm partnering with to overcome and drive positive outcomes with their data. Now, I give you to this at the high level. There's also data ingestion piece. We don't really call that a pillar, but it's definitely an important part to this. You've got identity management across this entire stack, as well as modern monitoring and governance across the entire stack. But the 4 pillars here, these really are kind of the 4 key pillars when we talk about what a modern analytics ecosystem looks like. Now, within each of those pillars, we have specific technologies. And this kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier about Microsoft kind of being in a unique position to kind of play across this entire ecosystem, right? And so Microsoft, with Azure, has technologies that fulfill kind of all of the needs and the requirements of these 4 different pillars, right? So we have Azure Data Factory, the number 2 item here up here on the screen, right, is our cloud scale data movement and automation. So we need to be able to connect to data wherever it exists. Every institution that I'm working with has data all over the place. It's in AWS, it's in GCP, it's in Azure, it's in their data center, it's in spreadsheets, and it's in Access databases, it's in Oracle databases, it's in SQL databases, it's everywhere. And wherever that data lives, we need to be able to get it. And that's what Azure Data Factory helps us do. It helps us connect to that data wherever it lives at, and then ingest it into Azure Data Lake, which is our cloud scale general purpose storage that is optimized for analytics. So I can ingest that data in its raw format and store it in the data lake. And then once I bring that to the data lake, I can then start to clean it and massage it using tools like Azure Data Factory or using Spark on Azure, using Azure Machine Learning. There's lots of different tools and technology that I can use to work with that data. And the tool and technology that I may choose is going to depend on my level of technical expertise in the data sets and what I need to accomplish there. Azure Synapse Analytics is the enterprise data warehousing pillar here in the blue box. This is where the worlds of big data, advanced analytics, and enterprise data warehousing come together using our massive parallel SQL Server engine, where I get distributed storage and distributed querying all in a single place. The beauty of Azure Synapse is that our distributed storage and our distributed compute are decoupled from one another. So that means that just because I need more compute resources for a big ETL job or for some hefty queries that my users want to run, doesn't mean that I necessarily need to buy more storage unless I need it. That also means that I can scale up my storage and scale it down independently of the compute resources, and the vice versa is true as well. I can scale up compute resources when I need it, and I can scale them down or even turn them off if I no longer need those compute resources, which gives us some really interesting opportunities when we think about, well, how do I optimize for cost in kind of an OpEx world, moving from like a CapEx world to an OpEx world? How do I optimize for cost in those things? Well, in the OpEx world, you can turn things off when you don't need them, and that presents a great opportunity for how you think about optimizing cost. In the data virtualization world, you have tools and technologies like Azure Analysis Services. If you've used SQL Server Analysis Services, you may be familiar with that. This is where I can standardize the relationships between objects, hierarchies, the security model, the KPIs, the business metrics. I can standardize all of that in kind of a single semantic model that acts as the map between the charts and the data sets in the enterprise data warehouse and the data lake. And then you've got the data science tools, Spark on Azure, Azure Machine Learning, or even customized VMs for GPU-based VMs for deep learning models, or data science VMs for custom tool sets that your data scientists and your researchers might be using. And then from a data visualization perspective, Power BI, one of the top BI tools out there, is our cloud-based analytics and reporting service, and it is deeply integrated across this entire stack. Excel, we have many customers that still continue to use Excel for self-service, being able to connect to data warehouses and BI semantic models, and even third-party visualizations tool. That's the beauty of this stack, is that it's a very open stack. We don't say, hey, to play and be successful in our world, you have to use our BI tools. You know, for better or worse, the users, they love their BI tools, and sometimes you can't You can't just convince them to use, whatever the new BI tool is or whatever you think is the best. And so we have to enable them to be successful with the tools that they're comfortable with. And in this environment, users can bring the tools that they're comfortable with. You've got identity management with Azure Active Directory across this entire stack. So I can manage permissions and security and authentication across the entire stack, whether we're talking about ETL developers, data scientists, BI and reporting experts, end users, or anybody in between, right? We can manage identity across the entire stack. And then we've got monitoring with Azure Monitor and data governance with Azure Purview. And so this is a very complete stack. And so when we talk about addressing those challenges we were talking about earlier about having this unified platform, the single source of truth, right? This really is an ecosystem that can help you solve those challenges. I did want to kind of share just a couple of examples of some of the institutions that we're working with, and these are all referenceable customers. Of course, we have many that aren't referenceable, but I've included write-ups for all of these customers because I think it's important for you to hear from your peers about how they're being successful with these tools and technologies. At the end of the deck, there's a slide that has links to resources and everything here. One of the customers I wanted to call out here is Medical University of South Carolina. They're a customer I've been working with probably about 5 years. And I remember the first time I met this customer, I met the chief data officer there. And he said, we don't want to just put our crap in the cloud. Those are his words, not mine. But he said, we don't want to just put our crap in the cloud, right? And his point that he was making was that we don't want to just migrate to the cloud. The cloud isn't just a place for us. It's really a platform for innovation. And so we need to be able to build a solution that solves the challenges that we're facing today by building cloud native and building from the ground up to solve these challenges from the get-go. And that's actually how we ended up with this reference architecture that we just looked at. Those 4 pillars: the data lake, the data warehouse, data virtualization, and the tools layer. And so the team at MUC, they were huge contributors to that. And then the other universities here as well also contributed to that. University of Pennsylvania, Penn Med up there in the top right. I love something that the director of their BI team told me. He said, we need to be able to focus on the A in analytics, right? And the point that he was making there was that he viewed his team as delivering the best value when they are focused on deriving new insights, drilling down on the data, exploring data, and being successful with the delivery of analytic solutions, right? They wanted to get out of the data center business and stop spending time doing things like taking backups and troubleshooting query performance and all of those types of things, right? They wanted to focus on the A in analytics. And what that meant for them was that analytics at scale was the #1 requirement for them. And what this has really led to them is some pretty incredible further innovation. So now they're now doing advanced analytics on billions and billions of rows. So now they have a world where they can bring genomics data together, data from the ERP, from the EHR, the SIS, the LMS, financial data, and all of that can live side by side in a single unified environment. And before these kind of initial projects and the foundation was laid for these use cases, that was really not an option for them. And it's something that they struggled with. But now, since they've kind of laid that platform, and now with the success of some of those initial projects, what they've really seen is a standardization of KPIs and business metrics across some pretty vast data sets, which has really improved their trust in data and how they successfully use data to make data-driven decisions. This has also led to development of predictive models for things like predicting student churn, student success, even things for some on their healthcare side for things like inpatient mortality, readmissions, fall risk. These are all things that are now possible and being done in the platform. And now they're able to also securely share data with researchers and other institutions in a meaningful and governed way that's pretty groundbreaking for them. When we had that conversation with the Penn Med team and they were kind of telling us, I was like, well, what have you learned? What I want to know is I want to know what are the lessons learned, because I need to take this to other institutions that are struggling with these same problems. And honestly, everybody struggles with these problems to some degree. You might do it well or you might do it worse, but everybody struggles with these problems to some degree. And this is really what he told me, and I've kind of captured it here on the slide. in this platform, unifying data in a flexible, meaningful way is possible. And that's really the first step to building a solution for deriving actionable intelligence from your data. The data has to be unified and it needs to be a flexible and scalable platform. The second thing he called out was that data governance domain committees are really crucial, right? Data governance is an important part to success. So we need to have oversight in how the data is being used, how it's calculated, how we roll it up, how we aggregate it, and who has access to this data. The third thing he called out was that standardized metrics are important to support true self-service, right? You can't have people building their own calculations one-off. You can't have Bob over here building his calculations in Power BI and Tom building it in Tableau and Susie building it in Excel. You can't have that, because what's going to happen is everybody's going to show up at the same meeting. They're having different numbers on the reports. And so a standardization of the metrics and the KPIs is important. Not just a single source of truth from a data perspective. We also need a single source of truth from a KPIs and metrics perspective. And that's when we can start to focus on the A in analytics. And I called that out earlier. Spend as little time managing servers and administering backups, right? That's not where we want our analysts to spend their time, right? Your analysts and your developers and your BI professionals, these are highly trained people, and their time is expensive, and it's best spent innovating rather than doing things like managing servers and patching servers and taking backups and all those kinds of things. And what the last thing that he called out here is the last one here on the right side of the screen, is that you need an environment that allows you to succeed fast, fail fast, and then succeed slow, and in that order. And the call out there is that, right, if we want to try something new, you need an environment where you're either going to succeed fast or fail fast, because the longer it takes to do one of those, the more costly it is. And the thing he loves about the platform that they developed in Azure is that it's a world where they can try things very quickly, and it's either going to work or it's not going to work, and then they can move on and try something else, right? And that was probably one of the most profound things that I kind of heard him call out, was the ability to succeed fast or fail fast. It has to be one or the other. So I just wanted to kind of share that with you as far as, you know, what I'm seeing with organizations and institutions that are struggling to be successful with data. We have some resources that I think will be helpful to you, and that's with our education transformation framework. The education transformation framework identifies key areas across your institution where Microsoft solutions, like what we just talked about, can enable transformation. There's a lot of different areas in here, and you can kind of see some of the things that are highlighted on the screen, but the first area really is student success, from things like recruitment to retention to alumni engagement and fostering long-term affinity for your institution. I mean, these are all areas where we've done work with major institutions and have played in this area for a long time. Teaching and learning involves innovative strategies for remote and hybrid learning so that you can maintain educational outcomes no matter where your students and faculty are. And that's proven to be really important in today's day and age. Secure and connected campus builds on a secure foundation for maximizing data and streamlining management and operations. And at the basis of that, secure remote collaboration is essential for academic research during the time of hybrid operations. So what I want to do now is I just want to open the floor for any questions that you might have. There's no bad questions or anything. I hope you guys found that information beneficial. I hope that you learned a lot. And so if you have any questions, feel free to hop off mute or chime in the chat window. Feel free to key your question in the chat window. And but at the while you guys are thinking about your questions and come up with your questions, I'll make sure I share the slides, and then we'll get those posted so that you have access to all of the cool resources that are on the end here. So I put all the links here in the end, according, of course, the link to our higher education solutions page, the educational transformation framework page, and then a lot of the different customer stories that we talked about, how other institutions, your peers, are out there making use of data with this platform.
At this time, if you have any questions, please come off mute. Sound like somebody did. Oh no, I think it was just echoing back from you. That's okay.
Yep. Well, if you don't have any questions, feel free to drop, or if you want to ask questions. I'll hang around on here for a little while. I don't mind waiting. But thank you everybody for attending. Thanks, Steve, for letting me participate in this. It was really, really fun. And I hope that you guys found it a beneficial use of your time.
Sure. Rob, do you have a question?
I did. So Dustin, the framework that you were displaying before, have any of your customers taken advantage of that? I mean, is that a speaking place for you with customers?
So let me go back here. So are you talking about like this here or the
that
slide?
Oh, just the framework, the framework page there.
Yeah. So if this is something that you're interested in learning more about, feel free to reach out to me.
Okay.
Because I may not be the guy who covers you, but
Yeah.
What institution are you with, Rob?
I'm with Washington, Washington University, the one in St. Louis, Missouri,
Yeah.
as opposed
So,
to DC or state.
Yeah, got it. Yeah, so that wouldn't be me, but if you'll shoot me an email, I'll get you in touch with. So my role at Microsoft is I'm a data and AI specialist. So this is like all that I do with our customers. But every territory has a person that is like me that covers this kind of stuff. And so if you want to learn more about this, I'm happy to get you connected with the right person and get you moving in that direction.
Yeah, I'll send you an email for sure.
Okay. Yeah. Perfect. Great.
And for the rest of those, there is a survey. Please do fill it out. There's a place in the survey for you to leave your email address. So if you want more information, we can reach out to you as well.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Dustin.
Yeah. Let's see. Justin had a question. He typed it in the chat. He said, "Can you talk about how to segregate the data so that only folks can see the data they should?" Yeah, that's really interesting question. It's certainly something that's top of mind for every organization, right? Is how do we ensure that the right people get access to the right data? And that's I think the beauty of this platform, right, is that you have very, very tight governance and security controls across the entire solution. So whether we're talking about areas of the data lake where users should only get access to maybe even an individual file or a folder, right? That's certainly possible in this platform. If we're talking about the data warehouse where people need to see only certain domains within the data warehouse, we can facilitate that as well. We can even do things like row level security, column level security, object level security, with even in things like BI models, so that users are only seeing the subsets of the data that they should have permissions on. And the cool part about that is that can be a very data-driven process. And so there's not a lot of once you get the framework kind of set up for how you want your security work, it's not a lot of maintenance to kind of keep that thing, because it's very data-driven. And so just to give you an example, I have an institution that has a reporting solution that they share with several colleges, and the deans should only see their college, and then the vice deans only get to see certain things, but they have that security all runs through Azure Active Directory. So they have security groups, they add membership to the security groups, and then those users that are in those security groups get access to only the pieces of data that they should have access to as defined by that kind of security group in those roles. Does that answer your question, Justin?
Yes, thanks.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thanks for the question. All right, bye, Steve. Steve had to drop. Any other questions? All right. Well, it's 5 o'clock. If there's no other questions, I hope everybody has a great day. Thanks for coming, and I'll talk to you later.
Thanks, Dustin. Hey, Dustin, did you get my chat? I just sent to external. I didn't have your contact info, so I just sent it in the Teams chat.
Yep, I got
Awesome.
it. I got it. Yeah. Thanks, Rob.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
All right. See ya. Bye.
Bye.
Yeah. Thank you, Nick. Thanks, Justin. Have a great day. Thank you, Miko.